no, that's my dad.
I'm trekking down there to go for a swim in his new saltwater pool soon.
That's a good idea. You should.
Yeah, I'm thinking you need some help breaking that thing.
It's amazing. Doesn't taste like salt water.
Hi, Scott. Hi, Scott.
Yes.
Shelley Emerson.
Wait, hold on. I can't hear. I'm going to stop sharing the music so that I can hear people better.
Yeah, we're about ready to begin, so that's great.
I mean, Shelley, hey. Hi.
Yes, hi.
So nice
Look,
to
I
meet you.
haven't cut my hair since the pandemic started, so it's way down here.
You look amazing. I haven't either. And it's like, it's really.
Me too. It's been an entire year.
Well, thank you all so much for joining. This opportunity is going to continue.
Thomas's truck that is.
All right. Oh, hey. Thank you. I know that there's still some people popping on, and we have a couple of introductions to do, and so I want to make sure we use our time wisely. So I'm just going to go ahead and kick it off. It is such an honor and pleasure to see faces and names and really be able to reach across these distances and health. Hi, Charles. Oh, yay. It's so fun. I get to see people and I get excited about it. And that's kind of what our hearts are wanting. So I just want to start us off by offering a reflection of the space that we in Atlanta, we occupy and therefore honor the Creek and Muskogee people and their land, as our theater has resided for over 40 years on this stolen land that we know as Atlanta. While our work spans nationally and internationally, our theater is a global center to vital conversations. And so it is necessary to keep this land acknowledgement from wherever you are at the forefront of our work as we address injustices across the globe with specifically in our sense, 7 stages, administrative and production practices. And so we have always existed on this idea of bringing vital conversations and connecting our everyday life to the creative process. And it's been a journey from the handover of the artistic leadership that I took, actually wanting Scott Turner Schofield to come on that journey with me at that moment. But we have existed as friends and colleagues and inspirers of each other's work for over 20 years. And it is such an honor to welcome all of you to this event that we have curated, inspired by a larger program funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Big Read program. And I'll introduce Destiny in just a moment, who will give you more details about that. But as the world shut down, we really wanted to put resources into artists' hands to work on the new things that they are working on, to bolster and connect across the lands and the things that are dividing us, and to really create vital conversations about how we can come together as a better humanity. And so that has been the inspiration for all of our programming. Virtually, we are imagining some hybrids in the future, and we do have some in-person events with our Saturday service days that Destiny will also explain a little bit more about. But looking at why we are essential, what is our role as artists, and how do we take our work further than just the artistic product. And that's what I believe this event offers us a space to connect about this evening. And so without talking, I'd love to introduce a dear friend and colleague and partner through the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read program, Joe Davich over at Georgia Center for the Book. He is really helping us create this platform and has been a lead partner in this programming 7-8 years now. So Joe, take it away.
Thank you so very much, Heidi. It's a pleasure to partner with 7 Stages for the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read. We've been going at it for 7 years now, and I I think it really helps us expand the community and fulfill the mission of the Georgia Center for the Book and public libraries as spaces to come together, spaces to read, and spaces to exchange ideas. We are so very happy to have Heidi and Mac and Katya and Debbie working on these programs. We're coming up on almost a year of doing these virtual programs. And although we can't gather at the library or at Seven Stages to be with you, we can come into your homes. We can share our spaces. Sometimes you can see where we have or have not dusted. But it gives us an opportunity maybe to be a little more personal with you. And tonight, presenting Dysphoria, or Hormones Don't Harm Trans People, People Do, is the perfect example that complements the book that we selected this year, which is Advice from the Lights by Stephanie Burt. If you'd like a copy of this, feel free to let us know in the chat, and Seven Stages or we at the Georgia Center for the Book will find a way to get a copy to you, either at Service Saturdays or at one of our branch libraries. It's a wonderful read. We encourage you all to do it and just take a look at the book, and maybe a little bit of an experience that you normally wouldn't have in your daily life. I would also like to thank our, of course, home, the DeKalb County Public Library, and being our library sponsor, and the DeKalb Library Foundation as well. Right now, I would like to turn it over to Destiny Thompson, who is the Education Director at Seven Stages, to talk to you a little more about what Seven Stages does and to introduce our featured guest this evening. Destiny?
Thank you, Joe. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all tonight. This has been a long time coming, so I'm very excited to introduce Scott very soon. But a little bit more about me. I am the Education Director at Seven Stages. I've been working with Heidi, Mac, Katya, Debbie, and everyone for past 3 years, and I'm really happy to be a part of this team. So one of the programs that we run and has sponsored this event tonight is the Big Read program. We take this program into different schools, different community centers, and we teach them how to create an artistic response from our book of choice. This year is Advice from the Lights. So we will take this text, and however they art, however you art, whether it's swimming, whether it's drawing, whether it's writing poetry, whether it's creating film, however you art, we meet you where you are and teach you how to create an artistic response based off of any resources that we can offer to you. We've been doing that, like Joe said, for the past 7 or 8 years, and we are excited to keep going with this program because it's been such a success. This year, during COVID, that program has expanded even more because now we just need to find a way to reach the community. So now we've created Service Saturdays, which will happen this Saturday. You feel free to come to the theater to grab a book. We've got 4 books this year. Heidi, show them up, show them. We've got Advice from the Lights. We've got Two Truths and a Lie. We've got Drowned. Teresa's also here. That's her book. We've got Blood Flow. These are the books that are available to us this year to create artistic responses for. And we want to hear from our students. We want to hear from our community members. We want to hear from local artists and people from all around the world. We've got people from Honolulu on this call, and that's really amazing. So I'll talk more about that program towards the end. But without further ado, the reason we're all
maybe for the drum roll, I've totally aside logistics. We do have transcripts available at the bottom of your screen. You are able to bring up transcribing words if that is helpful and of a desire. We will also be here for about an hour and a half. And so if you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and put it in the chat and we'll come back around during the post-show conversation. And at this time, as Destiny gives our drum roll for our star guest tonight, I ask that you do now turn your cameras off and mute yourself, and we'll kick the presentation off, and then we'll come back around for an in-person conversation. Thanks so much. Drum roll, go.
Okay, without further ado, I want to introduce our guest of honor, Atlanta renowned rooted actor, author, activist, and creator, Scott Turner Schofield. Give him energy, give him energy. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Oh, wow. Hi, everybody. Wait, where'd I go? Here I am. Hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Judy. I see Judy Norman. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you to Seven Stages for the continued and continual support. Thank you to Georgia Center for the book. Thank you to the Decatur Library. Thank you to the Big Read. This is an amazing opportunity to be here with you. And what I'm going to show you tonight is actually a presentation that I crafted together from a speech that I gave it was my last trip, actually, my last trip before the pandemic started. And the speech was called DYSPHORIA. And I gave this speech at a conference. It was the keynote speech at a conference called GEMS, which is for a group of therapists who serve LGBTQ youth. And we're particularly looking at trans youth and what the experience is, what's going on, and how can they best serve those youth. And the speech that I delivered, I kind of wasn't expecting to give. I wrote it, obviously I created the program for it, but the way that it came out of me was unexpected. I didn't realize I've been doing this work for such a long time. I started my transition over 20 years ago now. And I really thought that if I hadn't become, I wouldn't say I've become numb to, but I would say that I thought that I had come to a place where I was able to really, not be so enraged and outraged all the time. Turns out that wasn't right. And so I'm actually going to share this presentation with you as the original recording of the speech that I gave, because as the time has passed, two things have happened. One, the pandemic has come along and it's been a hard year, right? It's been for all of us. And I felt like I wouldn't be able to deliver the speech with the energy that I wanted to. And I think what's so key about this speech is the energy with which I gave it. So I really want you to experience that and really hear that. And secondly, nothing has changed since I gave this speech. In fact, things have gotten worse. We can argue that we no longer have a person ostensibly in charge of our nation who took every opportunity possible to single out a very small percentage of people, i.e. transgender people, to use tax dollars to discriminate against human beings who are American in this country, right? We can argue that that's a better thing, except that now, post-election, we have 50 bills that are anti-trans in nature coming up in front of local and state legislatures. Since marriage equality happened, well, first of all, the LGBTQ community became the T community. Lesbians and gays went off to lead their mainstream life, primarily, and have left us and have, left us alone to fight our battles. And because we no longer have the political football of gay marriage to kick around people by what identities they have, transgender identity has become the political football. They're using people's ignorance to get them to vote one way or another. And so we are walking into what is going to be, I think, a really hellacious several years where American culture really grapples with transgender identity. Some of the bills are based in the idea that transgender women are going to change the face of sports by participating in them. And we're really talking about children, right? Transgender children who are trying to be on teams so that they don't have to be isolated, right? We're trying to legislate them out of the equal opportunity of participating in sports and schools. We're also calling the affirmation of transgender children child abuse in these bills. So you see the level and the tenor at which this conversation is happening. And so, as I said, I really wanted you to really hear where I was coming from in talking about just my experience. I'm only telling my story, but telling you my experience from the beginning, from really literally from the beginning, and peppering it with awareness of how culture has participated in dysphoria. And I'm going to give you all of these definitions in the talk, but I just now is the time for us to be having really deep and really real conversations about this topic. And I am going to warn you, there's a lot in this conversation. There's a lot in this lecture that's really hard. It's a very deep and difficult talk. Because that's a reflection of the time that we're in. It is a hopeful talk toward the end. It is a triumphant talk. You know, spoiler alert, things are great, right? As great as they can be right now for me. But, you know, I have overcome. I am continuing to move forward. But I hope that by telling you this story, you'll get a sense of not just what I went through, but what the people in your life could be going through, what people you don't even know will be going through as these conversations continue to unfold on a cultural level for us. And I hope that by the end of this talk, you'll feel empowered to really stand up, whether or not you have trans people in your life, right, besides me, right, that you'll feel empowered to really stand up for us and to take a stand and say, you know, it is not okay for you to be having these conversations. You are hurting people and you can tell them why. That's what I hope you'll get from this. And I can't say that I hope you enjoy it because I know that it's going to be a rough ride getting there, but I really look forward to talking about this and processing it with you afterwards. And you know, encouraging and empowering you to be the best allies you can be, which you already are being just by being here tonight. So here's the speech. I didn't go to sleep till like 3, so everything's fine, but I'm just, I'm gonna go deep with you all. Is that okay? I'm just gonna go for it. This was a really excellent opportunity, and I really appreciate Judy and Beck for letting me take stock of 20 years of being out. When I talk to in corporations, I often say, look, for 20 years, I've been dealing with people dealing with me, right? And that's a developmental process all of its own. And I didn't kind of realize quite how deep it was until I put this speech together. So we'll just kind of go for it together. So I've been talking about transgender issues in culture, politics, and education and the workplace for nearly 20 years. 20 years before that, I had no words to talk about it, but I did live the stories. Today, I want to share with you some of those stories while making the connection to how the personal, relational, and institutional experiences of being transgender and non-binary, which by the way, I'm both, are linked. Spoiler alert, it's through dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is discomfort, unhappiness, or distress due to one's gender or physical sex. The current edition, DSM-5, uses the term gender dysphoria, where it previously referred to gender identity disorder, making it clear that they no longer consider the gender identity to be disordered, but rather the emotional state of distress which relates from the gender identity. I just copied and pasted that from the internet, okay? Because I think just that, this idea that the emotional state of distress which results from the gender identity is something we need to work on. So let's pull back to the definition of dysphoria itself. A profound state of unease or dissatisfaction, that's the definition of dysphoria. A profound state of unease or dissatisfaction. Profound. It acts on all levels. And just as profound, I notice how we all experience dysphoria when it comes to gender. Today, I'm going to explore my own experience with dysphoria within a history of activism and media representation, which are the profound threads of my own life. Of course, I am only one person with one experience, but as a professional storyteller, I do know how the particular connects to the universal in real ways. I'm writing my second book, and this is a very early piece of it. You're the first audience to hear it. Sorry. I honor all of the differences that every person in this room may bring to my story. I ask you to let our diversity be our connection and not a distance, since diversity is the only constant in this world. I look forward to expanding on these thoughts and to listening to your reflections during the conference today, if you have them. I only ask that you consider the way that dysphoria can make us unpleasant to one another, and to be mindful of what is about your story, not mine, and to be constructive and kind with your comments, because this is really new work for me. I'm starting to see that dysphoria operates on levels that are personal, meaning psychological, relational, meaning all types of relationships we have, and institutional, meaning all of the institutions we engage with, from the classroom to the presidency, from the workplace to religion, and so on. I'm starting to see that we all have dysphoria on some level when it comes to gender, and that we do it to each other as much as we do it to ourselves. I hear why in this quote. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and others, and having no respect, he ceases to love. It's Dostoevsky. I'm looking at how the lies that gender made me tell were a function of a collective dysphoria that shaped my life in these three ways, inside and out. It's kind of a bummer, but spoiler alert, it resolves well. So let this serve as a content warning for everything that will come up in this story. This is definitely a PG to rated R, PG-13 to rated R kind of story, so please take care of yourselves and those around you as you need to. I think all of these things are symptoms and expressions of dysphoria. This thesis isn't new, but I want to go deep into it. The dysphoria I lived was not the result of my gender identity. It was the result of the dysphoria that we all have and inflict on each other. When I look at so much of the things that I did and thought, I knew I wouldn't have done those things if I knew about dysphoria. I choose to believe that the politicians and the media and all the people they impact would not have said and done many of the things that they did had they known that they were caught up in dysphoria. If I had known, I might have known how to meet my challenges. I might have learned the necessary tools sooner, rather than being pushed around by the force of it for so long. Once we all investigate the dysphoria we are experiencing and enforcing on one another by ways that we insist on gender on a collective societal level, I believe we will find constructive ways to evolve through it, and I believe that this is part of the trans magic that trans people have always brought for humanity to experience and learn from. You're welcome. I want to start by asking you, please don't hear me blaming any of the challenges I faced on my parents or my upbringing. No one who raised me had the tools with which to recognize their own dysphoria when it came to how they treated me, nor any understanding of what dysphoria would lead me to do to myself. I do not in any way believe that my family would have done the work of dysphoria if they knew what it would do to me. And I believe the same about you. I believe that we can heal from this by looking at it and dealing with it. So people resist the push to ask for pronouns. These tiny words bring out the strongest reactions, mostly because they're just so unimportant, right? Hello? Pronouns were being used for me before I was born. They're so important that we lather expectations.
I just want to break in the video stuff. Can you, I don't know what's happened, but
the most important piece of this conversation, and we can't start to change without changing our sensitivity around the use of pronouns.
It is not stuck for me, it's running still.
My mother knew I was a boy. I had a name and clothes all picked out for me, awaiting my arrival. Then the moment I was born, I was wrapped in a pink blanket. Dysphoria drowned out the powerful...
I'm sorry, the image is stuck. Yes, the audio is running, but the image is stuck.
Dysphoria set in the moment I was born, starting with me and my mother and spreading out from there. Starting with the pronouns that they used before my birth. Funny how nobody had a problem changing that pronoun real quick back then. Relational dysphoria acts first and strongest and most long-lasting. How could anyone not have known I was trans?
You need to stop.
The obvious fact that dysphoria works silently, often unconsciously. It's how we can look at the fact of our body in a factual...
Kanji's making it back to your computer. I think, Kanji, can you stop it for a moment?
All looked at that little boy and told him what a cute little girl he was. This, by the way, was where I started lying. Because what was truth when truth was just a bold-faced lie literally every important adult told me and expected me to tell? In 1986, Lou Sullivan founded one of the first advocacy groups for transgender men and publicly challenged psychological and medical institutions who claimed that trans men could not.
Sorry about that, folks. Scott, can you come back on and direct how to get back to where the video stopped? Is that possible?
I don't know why it stopped, so I don't know.
I don't either, because it's literally never stopped streaming on my computer. It kept going the entire time that's running this.
Yeah, everybody else is saying that it's stuck.
Audio is going, but the video stopped on
Yeah.
the dysphoria slide.
That's very strange because video is definitely still going on my end.
Yeah, mine stopped with the depression, self-hatred, interpersonal abuse, but the audio was perfectly fine. Maybe stop sharing and then reshare it. That maybe.
Yeah, I was just about to suggest the same thing. I do this for work all the time. I would say go back to that point, stop the screen share, start it again, and then play.
Just one moment. Are we just starting from the beginning, or are we going to go back to
No,
where we
could
just
you
were?
go to where the screen got stuck?
I can come over there, Katya. It's on the dysphoria. I know.
Thanks for your grace and patience, everyone.
The dysphoria that I have lived was not the result of my gender identity with the tiny bottle, correct?
Yeah,
All right.
probably just stay by it and make sure that it doesn't do that again.
But this is also a perfect opportunity to let us know. I know we had one taker that wanted to know how to get a book. Let us know how you can want a copy of Stephanie Burt's Advice from the Lights in the chat, folks.
So, Katya, I think you can go a little bit forward. There, go to the next. Just go a little forward. I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. Keep going. And okay, great. Start at that transition. Great.
It's okay. All right.
Awesome.
Going.
I want to start by asking you, please don't hear me blaming any of the challenges I faced on my parents or my upbringing. No one who raised me had the tools with which to recognize their own dysphoria when it came to how they treated me, nor any understanding of what dysphoria would lead me to do to myself. I do not in any way believe that my family would have done the work of dysphoria if they knew what it would do to me. And I believe the same about you. I believe that we can heal from this by looking at it and dealing with it. So people resist the push to ask for pronouns. These tiny words bring out the strongest reactions, mostly because they're just so unimportant, right? Hello? Pronouns were being used for me before I was born. They're so important that we lather expectations onto people who haven't been born yet with them. They are the most important piece of this conversation, and we can't start to change without changing our sensitivity around the use of pronouns. Case in point, my mother knew I was a boy. I had a name and clothes all picked out for me, awaiting my arrival. Then the moment I was born, I was wrapped in a pink blanket. Dysphoria drowned out the powerful force of my mother's own intuition. Dysphoria set in the moment I was born, starting with me and my mother and spreading out from there. Starting with the pronouns that they used before my birth. Funny how nobody had a problem changing that pronoun real quick back then. Relational dysphoria acts first and strongest and most long-lasting. How could anyone not have known I was trans? Look at me. The obvious fact that dysphoria works silently, often unconsciously. It's how we can look at the fact of our body in a factual mirror and still see hallucinations. My relatives all looked at that little boy and told him what a cute little girl he was. This, by the way, was where I started lying. Because what was truth when truth was just a bold-faced lie literally every important adult told me and expected me to tell? In 1986, Lou Sullivan founded one of the first advocacy groups for transgender men and publicly challenged psychological and medical institutions who claimed that trans men could not be gay. In the 1987 revision of the DSM, the American Psychiatric Association added gender identity disorder as a classification for transgender people. I would not know about this until 2003, but all of us would know it powerfully through culture and policy throughout my life. At this age, I went to a summer camp at the Y for a week. My dad was really late dropping me off the first day. He said, "Go on in, register yourself, figure it out." I was like 7. So I went in and I told them my name was Scott, because it was. And I had this week free. One of the things we had to do was get a buddy to go to the bathroom. So me and this other boy went to the bathroom on the first day. I went into the stall, he went up to the urinal, he said, "You sit down to pee?" And I said, "Yeah, you stand up to pee." And by the end of the week, he was sitting down with me. I never told anyone that story until I was an adult. After that week of freedom, I was filled with self-loathing. I was a liar. I couldn't speak the truth, and that terrified me more. Being something unspeakable. I was a little boy until I was 11 years old. I remember the day that it stopped. It was sometime in the summer, maybe July or August, and I was out back behind the garage with my best friend, Fran. Fran was another boy whose real name was Francis, so he had gender problems all of his own. We were building a fort out of moldy wood behind the garage, and I wasn't wearing a shirt because I never wore a shirt between the end of July and September. I didn't have any breasts to speak of, and my hair was so short everybody assumed I was a boy, and I didn't disabuse them of the notion. I was headed into 6th grade, and Fran was headed into 8th. He asked me where my shirt was, and I told him it was too hot for one. And then he replied, "You know you need to start acting like a girl." At that word, I dropped to one knee and began furiously pumping my Reebok Air high tops in order to avert my attention from his and his attention from me. Remember those shoes? "Oh yeah?" I said, "Well, what if I don't want to?" "Then I won't be able to stop what happens to you," he replied. I have no idea what he meant, and to this day I still don't, but I remember feeling duly terrified, knowing that it meant some kind of horrible bullying would take place, not sure if it would start with Fran, and so I ran back inside and put my shirt on. I became the best girl I could to protect myself from what would happen to me if I didn't. Now the same year, this photo was taken. Brandon Tina was brutally assaulted and murdered in Nebraska. I wouldn't know about it until I was in college. Stories like his didn't make newspapers where I lived, and anyway, when they did, they all called Brandon Tina and a woman. One of my most important people told me very seriously that I would go to hell if I didn't accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I knew that Jesus would never accept me. It was my first experience of institutional dysphoria, where I found a profound and extremely painful discomfort in relating to religion and to God. I became deeply depressed, lost my sense of attachment to the world, attempted suicide a month later, and never really felt sustainably happy again for 15 years. Just a friendly reminder that they have banned people from the military before, and it was eventually overturned. In 1994, the Gazebo, a dedicated chat room for transgender people, was started on AOL by Gwendolyn Ann Smith, providing a gathering place and resource center with a bulletin board. Remember those? By the mid-1990s, Ms. Smith said the Gazebo had tens of thousands of unique visitors a month. In 1995, Phyllis Fry and Ricky Ann Wilkins held the first transgender lobbying day in Washington, D.C., which would seed a harvest of transgender rights organizations. Now, right at this time, I was a queer kid in Charlotte, North Carolina who loved theater. I loved pretending to be someone else. Theater was where I turned dysphoria into something that felt good, which other people applauded. Now, The short version of what happened was, when the Pulitzer Prize-winning play Angels in America toured through Charlotte, an upswell of homophobia made national news. The elected officials of my county took all public money away from the arts, slashing after-school and symphony programs to, quote, steward public funds in the face of the homosexual agenda. A Democrat said into the microphone of the county commission meeting, beamed into my television at home, that, quote, all homosexuals should be pushed off the face of the earth, end quote. Now, I didn't know that I wasn't gay at the time, but most people still don't know the difference between gender and sexuality either, so. All I knew was that I was one of those people that these powerful people hated and would take things from. And from their perspective, that was all I needed to know. This debate went on for years, every day in the paper and on the local news station we listened to in carpool. It happened out of the blue, on impulse. Or maybe in hindsight, it didn't. It was relational. My first girlfriend's father found out we were dating and beat her up. I hated myself for doing that to her by being me. In 1991, 1 year after the murder of Rita Hester, Transgender Day of Remembrance was founded to record, observe, and honor trans people lost to violence each year. This is the same year that the film Boys Don't Cry depicts the brutal assault and murder of Brandon Teena, and the cisgender actress who played him won an Oscar. But at the time, it felt really good, didn't it? Didn't it? Now, this is where I want to point out that when every single cisgender actor who wins an Oscar for playing a trans person, every single time, shows up looking just as cis as they can be, it reinforces the dysphoria in global audiences and instructs them that trans people are really just the sex they were assigned at birth and are just playing dress up. That is what the fight about casting transgender actors in transgender roles is all about. It is about dysphoria. We are fighting to make Hollywood stop infecting everybody with dysphoria. If you knew that that's what Hollywood is doing by not casting transgender actors, you wouldn't fight us. You would join us. If you knew the life-saving miracle of seeing one trans person on screen, you would join us. I wonder who I would become if I could have seen someone like me then. All I know is how I accepted it, the way I always shrunk myself to fit every hero on TV, Transgender Warriors, and Kate Bornstein's My Gender Workbook. Finding out that trans people have existed across all time and every culture, that we're everywhere. It was like seeing stars and knowing that they're there even in the daytime. Also, in the fall of 2000, I was involved in a car accident that should have killed me, but which just gave me really bad PTSD. I started therapy and lucked into a beautiful and accepting therapist who took my lead when I wrote a big question mark on the line provided for gender, and we ran for it. I did my first solo performance in 2001, the first time I spoke my story into the world. It was a non-binary manifesto about a decade before people would start using the word non-binary to describe themselves. The word genderqueer, which came into use about 5 years before that, felt outside of my generation and definitely outside of Atlanta where I lived. Not a word I could say to my mama that she would understand. Plus, it didn't account for how I mostly wanted to be called he, even if I knew I was a deeply queer feminist him who felt totally fine, in fact, a little in love with his femininity. Here's a piece from that solo performance. What's up? Till I was 11 years old, I thought I was a boy. Look what we do to boys in our culture. Does this boy look like he's got a feminist consciousness, like he's got a thought worth much of anything rolling around in his head? Yeah, but it's a white boy's world, right? We let him go and we don't face the consequences. If I'm oppressive, you're repressed, oppressive, repressed, repressive, oppressed. If you're repressive, I'm oppressed, oppressive, repressed. It doesn't make any difference. It's not about your hair or what you wear or what you got going on down there. As long as we are standing at the door to the law, we're letting the folks behind it control everything. Yeah, I wore the training bra. I went through the decathlon of puberty. Everybody and his best friend's mother training me to be a woman. I'm with Ani DeFranco. She said, you could try to train me like a pet. You could try to teach me to behave, but I tell you, if I haven't learned it yet, I'm not gonna sit. I ain't gonna stay. But maybe I didn't want to be a man. Maybe I like it just fine, thank you, exactly the way I am. Man like this, I got choices. I can elect myself king of the world or be selected by a group of my peers as queen for a day. I want an identity card for this moment. You know what I'm saying? It is not about your hair or what you wear. We are bodies in a metal tube hurtling fast through time and space. So what are we gonna do to get there? Where? There. Where the space inside lives out loud, where social control goes underground, and we can speak with our mouths full of who we are. Who am I? Touch me. What am I? See me. Where am I? Taste the air with all of your most beautiful senses, and then you tell me, huh? Without saying a word. People liked it, but they didn't know what to do with it. I was an independent artist for over a decade because the idea of being a transgender actor wasn't even really an idea back then, even as I was having more of an acting career than most of the people I graduated theater school with. I gave my first educational workshop in 2002. This is where I finally had words and concepts, like that sexual orientation and gender identity are two separate concepts, that trans people have existed across all time and every culture but have been erased and we don't call it transphobia, that misgendering and dead naming feels like death by 1,000 paper cuts, that embodying your authentic gender identity, however works for you to do so, is necessary, not cosmetic, and more. Y'all, I work to put myself out of a job, but I have been giving basically the same speech at least a dozen times per year, every year since. But like I said, this is a new speech just for you. Around the same time, the Transgender Law Center was founded, along with the Sylvia Rivera Law Project and the National Center for Trans Equality, which means that individually and collectively, we were all speaking our truths louder than ever, but into a deep, silent space of relational and institutional dysphoria that refused, often violently, to hear us. And then, it's just as shocking to me as it might seem to you, another one. Again, relational. Toxic relationships always made me want to kill myself, because if I weren't myself, relationships would not be toxic. How could I be anything but toxic, or in anything that wasn't toxic, as a person steeped so heavily in dysphoria? If you can't love yourself, how can you love anyone else or accept healthy love? In 2004, I changed my name legally, and I had one of those run-ins with institutions that would become the norm. How are we all doing? Everybody okay? All right. So I stood before a judge and changed my name legally. Myself and 5 women from the Tri-County area each enjoyed this simple but powerful legal transformation on this particular Thursday, extracting ourselves name first out from under the thumb of the man. The man, in my case, an intransigent social system which conflates sex with gender and will not let me be who I am. The man in the cases of each of these women, their ex-husbands. Differentiate as you will. Now, I am judged and found unworthy of manhood in the checkout line. I didn't need to formalize the process, but it had to be done. Try as I might, I could not get the femininity out of my given name. And just to make things interesting, I did all of this in Texas. Yes, Texas. We assembled, my 5 lady friends and I, before the judge. Emotional exchanges about alimony and paternity had been echoing off the hallowed walls of justice for a good half hour, and continued whispered over the shoulder pads and the backs of chairs in between decrees. My hands poured sweat as I sat in my dress slacks and tie. For all I knew, they might think I was one of them, a minion of the man. Katie Lauren Kilborn, the judge called. I rose and made my way to the stand. As he watched me approach, he laughed. You need a name change, don't you, son? Really happened. Yes, sir. It might be a little more complicated than that, though. Well, let's see it. He treated me differently than the women who came before me, but I knew that this undeserved kinship would soon shatter with his stare. I presented the judge with two different orders. The first was to change both name and gender designation. The second, just in case, was a simple name change. The judge took a good long look at the first order, then eyed me, then glanced back at the paper, then back to me, back to the paper, back to me, back to the paper. Unusual case. I don't think I've actually seen this before. He was the kind of man you'd expect a judge to be, right? I mean, of course, he was white and male, but also he was silver-haired and broad-shouldered. Perhaps he was once athletic, though he seemed too tall for football, too thick for baseball. I imagined him playing basketball for Baylor. He picked up one of the law references on his desk and thumbed through. To be honest with you, I don't even know where I might find a precedent. Nope, it's not under sex. Darn it, can't find a section about gender. The court had fallen silent. I could feel 10 eyes magnified with the fury of a woman's scorn, sizing me up from behind, 10 ears pricked up in interest. The judge looked me over, but not in the way most people do when they consider what it means to have a transgender person standing in front of them. I didn't feel his eyes on my chest or my crotch. He framed my shoulders. He looked into my face and eyes. I hoped my tie was straight. Suddenly, the appearance of the knot was all that stood between me and that M on my driver's license. If only I'd gone for the Windsor knot instead of the four in hand. I just don't think I have the authority to do this kind of thing, he concluded. I can't decree that someone can be something else. I mean, if I did, you'd have people changing their identities all the time. He looked at me, it felt like, for help. I replied that I knew a few people who had done it, that perhaps a change in gender designation was just up to the judge's discretion, that he could even write, petitioner may not marry a person of the same sex before he signed it, just to cover himself in any sticky gay marriage situations. Remember what year it was? My judge frowned. I want you to know that I know that this is not a decision that you came to lightly. I know that you have to undergo many things in order to do this, and I do not have any problem with that. I really don't. In fact, if I knew there was some case law somewhere, I'd do it for you. I really would, but as it stands right now, I don't believe that I can. I answered that I could go find out for him. I could be back with a law book later that day. Well, do you want to change your name? I can do that for you at least. He felt almost like a nice neighbor who, finding a would-be borrowed lawnmower out of gas, offered at least a weed whacker with which to do the job. From behind me in the courtroom, I heard a divorcee whisper, I think I saw this on Oprah. He swore me in, so help me God. It went on record in the state of Texas that I changed my name as part of my gender transition, and that each of those names reflects my mother's family history. When I uttered the words sex change into the record, my judge blinked reflexively. Finally, he adjudicated, ordered, and decreed me Scott Turner Schofield, and as I exited past the 5 silent women, he called out after me, "Good luck, son." Now, medically speaking, I got a letter from a therapist diagnosing me with gender identity disorder so I could go after hormones and surgery if I wanted to. In 2005, I talked my way into getting hormones out of the Feminist Women's Health Center in Atlanta. It took months and every scrap of critical analysis I had to convince the women working there to do the mission of the Men's Health Project, founded in memory of Robert Eads, whose life was the subject of the 2001 documentary, Southern Comfort. Which is why these cis folks thinking that we just want to like willy-nilly inject children with hormones is so infuriating. Gatekeeping is dysphoria's last-ditch push against us, and it uses every last weapon it has, from trusted but ignorant doctors to health insurance administrators and back into your own health concerns where there are no studies to calm you with. Stop acting like it's easy. We are only asking for it to just be possible for more of us on the timeline that is right for each of us, which can only be measured as the time right up until the moment before we kill ourselves, or rather are killed by the disease of dysphoria. I don't know about you, but I would rather have a trans or non-binary medically transitioning child than a dead child. That happened. In 2007, Candace Cain became the first openly trans woman to star in primetime drama. In 2008, trans model Isis King was featured in America's Next Top Model, and America got its first openly transgender mayor, Stu Rasmussen. In 2009, Chaz Bono, transgender son of Cher and Sonny Bono, announces his transition. By the way, are you noticing a ratio here? 3 trans women's stories for 1 trans man's and no non-binary people? That's about right. Now, just a reminder, seeing yourself in culture is one of the most powerful weapons against dysphoria. We're doing well now, but we are failing trans men and non-binary people badly still. This also happened in 2009. Hopefully the volume will work. Let's see.
Let's be a winner.
Hi, ladies.
Hi.
My name's Scott Schofield, and I just flew in from out of town. I'm on tour with my book right now. I spend most of my time out teaching colleges and universities.
Not interested, sorry.
That's okay. I go around talking about masculinity and what it means to be a guy and how to be different from most of the macho stereotypes. What I do in order to do that is a theater show called Becoming a Man in 127 Easy Steps. And I spend most of my time in that show up on a Cirque du Soleil type fabric, which I climb up and do tricks in and all that stuff.
Wow. How much do you weigh?
I weigh 145 pounds.
That's gorgeous. How tall are you?
5'11".
That's gorgeous.
Likewise.
I'm Jen.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks, ladies.
I like nerd hot. He's definitely nerd. I don't know about hot.
There was only ever 1 episode of this show. And it premiered and had its series finale the slot before the Bachelor finale in 2009. So when I applied to be on this show that was really titled The Conveyor Belt of Love, I mean, with a title like that, how could I not, right? I gave them my name, which they could Google. I told them the most interesting thing about me was my past, and nobody said a word to me about being trans. In the one moment of the show when I could have disclosed that I was trans, I protected myself from the unavoidable shock, horror, and shame that disclosure of trans identity on national TV would have been in 2009. I didn't disclose. It was an unlikely moment of not acting the way that dysphoria's self-hatred would have me act. The next morning, the headline, and I quote, "Surprise, we gave you a tranny," appeared on Pop Sugar, which was one of the biggest entertainment blogs of the time. It has since been scrubbed from the web, but here's another version. When asked to comment on my decision to, quote, deceive people by not immediately disclosing my transgender label to the folks at home, I said, I have always been an openly transgender man, hence my decision to appear on a reality game show. Take that, dysphoria. Okay, trigger warning. I'm not gonna get graphic about what happened, mostly because I don't remember it. I'm gonna tell you what I thought about it though, which to me is worse. In a move of liberated expansion, I determined that I could explore my sexual orientation as much as my gender identity, and I began sleeping with gay men. And then I was roofied and raped by one. And in a move of complete dysphoria, I believed that I deserved it. I went to the bar by myself. I accepted the drink. I was game for a hookup. For a decade, I believed that this is just what happens to you if you're not smart enough about it. My therapist had to repeat to me dozens of times, you could be naked and drunk and standing on a table, and that would not give anybody the right to have sex with you in that state. A dozen times, right? Now, to be clear, I would have taken care of somebody else who was drugged at a bar like I was, and I certainly would never believe that it is anybody's fault if the same thing happens to them. So why didn't I believe that I deserved the same treatment? Why couldn't I believe it? Well, dysphoria says you don't get to be taken care of the way other people do. And also, I don't take care of you because I hate you. Now, until this happened, I was cobbling together healthcare between the different state programs for low-income people and using my educational privilege to talk myself into any program I could to get the care that I needed. I had also been chased out of a doctor's office by a doctor who threatened to report me to this shitty insurance company I paid too much to when I was trying to get treatment for a respiratory infection that wouldn't go away. That's right, a doctor refused to help me breathe and threatened to take away my access to health care because she didn't like the way I lived my gender. The ACA and my gender identity disorder diagnosis no longer being a pre-existing condition meant that I could go to the doctor, talk about my medical care, and expect that it would be a medical conversation that I could get care around. Imagine that. I still got asked to do a pelvic exam when I came in with a sore throat by 2 separate doctors. But at least I could afford the copay. Finally, someone caught me trying to kill myself. Thanks to the Affordable Care Act, I was able to get inpatient and intensive outpatient care that I could pay for. I'm gonna tell you a story about it. I was conscious and not psychotic anymore when I walked into the vomit green hallway of STAB ward. It's kind of a sick abbreviation of stabilization. A social worker asked me if I had had any other hallucinations. I figured I was already in the nut house. I may as well tell them everything, even the things that sounded too crazy to say out loud. Just before I overdosed, I had a conversation with a raven. I was sitting on a snowbank and he told me it would be okay if I killed myself because it would make room for someone else who really wanted to be here. I figured he would know, so I listened to him. So a raven spoke to you? She clarified in a tone that suggested that this may be the least crazy thing she dealt with all day. Yes. And other birds too. Sometimes I think that if I could only remember the language of the birds, that I could speak to them too and they would tell me what to do. I wondered if this sounded as crazy to her as it did to me, if she understood how scary it felt to know that birds tried to talk to you while you were sane enough to know that they shouldn't. How many times have you tried to kill yourself? She inquired instead. 4. Now, Scott, you seem so much more intelligent than that. In my head, I screamed, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? But out loud, I whispered, sometimes I think it's because I'm too smart. She left me in the hallway and entered the bulletproof glass box separating the men's ward from the women's. I guess they thought that because the glass is bulletproof, it must also be soundproof, but I heard her tell the orderly, that child has already tried to commit suicide 4 times, to which the orderly replied, laughing, 4 times? Damn, just die already. I'm all for dark humor. In fact, I prefer it. But in that moment, it just made me cry. A tall, large black woman tiptoed quietly out of her room. Her hair stood on end and her barrettes and pigtails made her look like a child. Are you a boy or a girl? They had put me in the women's ward because they said a man might get offended at me being in his ward. I asked them how many women in mental institutions they thought might have 1 or 2 problems with men, especially a man on their ward. They responded that my genitalia determined that I would go into the women's ward and that they would check to ensure compliance. I got the feeling it wouldn't matter what they found physically. They had decided that I was a woman. But the woman asking me felt like a small child, despite her size, so I replied to her question the way I would to a kid. What do you think I am? I think you're a boy. All the other women on the ward thought I was a boy too, but they're crazy, of course. But after the 5th physical fight in a day broke out on the other side of the glass box, I found myself grateful to somehow still be a woman through institutional eyes. But I guess transgender people can't all be as crazy as people say, because if we were, we'd have our own ward. I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder. My therapist of 7 years revealed that she had once diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder, but never formally. She apologized for having put her gender bias into practice. Women with bipolar disorder are often misdiagnosed with borderline. So for 7 years of weekly visits, we did not treat my symptoms correctly because of gender. But maybe dysphoria clouded a clear diagnosis. I often wonder how much of the depression, suicidality, but also full body euphoria I used to swing between was really just pulls between the poles of a false binary we have created personally, relationally, and institutionally around gender. When a politician said something homophobic or transphobic or both, it cut to the quick of my soul. When I saw someone trans in the media, it felt like nothing less than being a part of history. When I wore an article of clothing that made me feel okay, or when someone called me he, I felt the incredible and rare sensation of belonging in my own body. Every one of these sensations felt like huge forces of energy, existence, not just experience. Was dysphoria the underlying cause of mental illness I experienced for so many years? Now that I know what to do about dysphoria, I wonder if it wasn't the other way around. I wonder that for me, and I also wonder whether it helps you think more clearly about some of your clients. I do not believe my therapist would have not correctly diagnosed me for so many years if she knew that she was in the thrall of gender dysphoria as a person acted upon by social factors and as a practitioner acted upon by institutional factors. I do not think that many of you professionals in this room know this yet about yourselves, and I ask you right now to wake up and look at it as if the lives of your clients depended on it. I also want to thank you for being here doing this work right now.
Okay, here we go.
This is my first day of recovery.
What would you do if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try not to sing out of key. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. I get to try with a little help from my friends. No, we have to do it right.
Therapists and caregivers can be our first friends in the battle against dysphoria in all of its forms when we don't even have a friend in ourselves. We need you to get ahead of dysphoria for us, to figure out what it is and how it operates on all of the levels. We need you to be a little smarter and stronger than us to help us get by. Now, after a suicide attempt where I'm not convinced that I didn't actually die for a little while, I decided to live with abandon. One piece of that was to stop wrapping up my chest like I was ashamed of it every day and to have surgery. It took me 7 years from the start of medical transition for me to decide on surgery because of institutional and relational dysphoria. Before surgery, all of the what-if questions, most unbelievably for a persisting child as I was the quiet belief that one day I might actually wake up from it all and decide to be a woman, which was really everybody else's fervent hope that I inject myself daily with to undermine the truth that I knew about who I was. After surgery, when I lay down on the beach for the first time, feeling the sun and air all over my body, I wondered who I would be if I had claimed myself right from the start. I tried not to mourn all of those years of loss for too long. I went swimming so I wouldn't know tears from ocean, and I left the tears in the water that day. When I woke up from surgery, I had the experience of a voice, hearing a voice, one that did not belong to me or anyone else in that room, telling me, the soul has no gender. I can't explain how deep this hit me. I'm still trying to fully understand it, though I am much closer than I ever was. Now in 2013, I was invited to give a TED Talk that I titled Ending Gender. It would be way too meta to stand on stage. She already video of me standing on stage there, so I'll give it a rest. Though at this point, the label non-binary had come into cultural consciousness for like a year or two. It was kind of starting to be there. People critiqued the talk for the idea of ending gender, as if I really believed that that was possible. The label that we didn't really have in 2013 was gender expansive, which I think would have changed the nuance, I think. What I was asking for in that talk, which uses vocabulary that just 7 years of rapid evolution and clarity later is now largely out of date, was for us to stop using gender to harm each other and ourselves. For all of us to be allowed to use whatever aspects of gender that have been labeled as masculine and feminine in whatever ways work and feel good for us, and to not punish anyone for their particular mix of it all. I was asking for us to allow gender expansiveness and to stop gender dysphoria. That's what I meant. That's what I still mean now. 2014 to 15 saw the biggest influx of media representation of transgender people in bigger ways than ever before. Laverne Cox blew people's minds and Orange is the New Black. Transparent put Amazon on the map for streaming series. By the way, I just want you to know that. We didn't understand that Amazon Video was gonna be what it was until Transparent. Like, that's significant, okay? Even though creator Jill Soloway themselves calls it a dangerous mistake to have chosen to hire a cis man to play trans women, but they did institute transformative action to hire trans and non-binary people at every level of the production, which no one had done. Caitlyn Jenner wound up on the cover of Vanity Fair in lingerie to announce her transition, and I became the first openly transgender actor in daytime television in a recurring role on The Bold and the Beautiful.
When you work for something your whole life, fight for it, pray for it, sacrifice, deal with death threats and casual contempt, you don't wait around for luck. You have your own back.
People ask me the difference between me and Nick. At the time I said these lines, I didn't believe the part about not waiting around for luck or having your own back, because dysphoria.
Hey, Nick. Glad you came by. I heard you, and I learned something.
Prove it. Don't discriminate. Firing public sector employees because they're transgender is against the law. So says the Attorney General. You too could join the 21st century.
At that moment were all the speeches I had said to myself in the shower, after workshops that never went well with employers, got signal boosted to 33 million homes globally. By the way, on a personal note, 2015 was when I really stopped lying. When lying became actually almost impossible for me to do. It was organic, the same way tears almost dried up completely when I started taking testosterone. I don't know whether it was everyone telling more truth than ever into the megaphone of media, or me being one of them, or what, but it was a powerful liberation from the form of dysphoria that being a compulsive liar is a symptom of. Remember what I said about how I wonder whether my diagnosis of bipolar disorder was not actually an underlying cause of my dysphoria, but rather a symptom of it? After the cultural euphoria of trans visibility and acceptance, institutions and relationships had an epic mood swing. Institutions and people simply could not handle their dysphoria of trans people and non-binary people being liberated, and the freakout continues to be horrible and terrifying. Maybe some of you remember it. Maybe some of you blocked it out, waking up to these headlines every morning. It had a deeply negative impact on transgender people. Bathroom bills have a body count. And then the election happened. I don't have to get into it, you all remember. Let's not relive the trauma. Let's just say it was America's biggest encounter with dysphoria on a holistic level. Us seeing ourselves in a way we never had before, in a way most of us do not like. A number at least as big as the popular vote that year, and more with every passing tweet. We know ourselves at our core not to be this. After that huge pop of visibility, suddenly the government started disappearing us from the .gov website to being counted on our country's vital statistics. One form of dysphoria is the feeling of existing and yet not really being there at all. 2017, .gov erasure, trans military ban, Department of Education and Justice officially unsupportive of trans students. HUD rescinds emergency shelter protections and stops counting homeless LGBTQ people. HHS stops counting LGBTQ elders. License to discriminate on religious grounds is enacted by Department of Justice. So the cognitive dissonance reoccurs when, in popular culture that year, of the 278 regular and recurring LGBTQ characters on broadcast cable and streaming programs, 16, that's a full 6%, become transgender. That doesn't sound like much, I know, but it was more than double the numbers of characters that came out in 2015, which was like 7. And that was considered an explosion of representation. In 2017, my partner and I announced that we were getting married. In the way that immigrants, the Jewish community, and LGBTQ people everywhere experienced an unexpected backlash of hatred after the election, we also did. An entire wing of my family, cousins who felt like brothers, a second set of parents to me growing up, refused to attend our wedding because they said we were two girls getting married and they could not support it. This felt especially dysphoric because from 2004, when I came out to them as trans, until 2017, that's 13 full years, not one of these relatives had so much as misgendered me even once. I felt like I had been welcomed at family gatherings. I built my sense of self post-transition on my family's acceptance of me, and it was mysteriously ripped away from me at a time that was supposed to be the happiest of my life. Of course, it wasn't mysterious at all. It was the emboldening of hatred that came with the election. It was America's dysphoria that took all love and respect, even among family, along with it. This relational dysphoria between family members who even still claim to love one another, based in the institutional dysphoria of what some powerful religious people have done to a population who only want to love God well, hit me in my body. Faced with the internal reflection of myself as a girl getting married, in the way that how your family sees you can be such a deep part of who you know you are and how you see yourself, it struck my entire body numb, racked with rage about this and the plain injustice of it. I feel as though I lost a loving part of myself that I cherished, which I do not know how I will ever get back. I am still rebuilding my life since this lightning bolt of relational, institutional, and personal dysphoria hit it. I don't know if I will ever truly heal from it, but I do believe that I can. Now, here's something really important to consider. After the tipping point and the pendulum swing, something really started happening for transgender and non-binary people. We saw it in the media, and I saw it directly in my training business. People really started paying attention. They started to care. I could take every workshop that I did from 2002 to 2015, add all of the participants together, and they would still not add up to the level of engaged interest I now see in every workshop I teach in every small town and big city I travel to starting in 2016. That is not hyperbole, I can count it. Now, I'm about to share some disturbing facts that you already know about the state of affairs in our country right now, but before I do, I offer this quote from Mahatma Gandhi, whose teachings on nonviolence I began studying in my recovery from my last suicide attempt. For as violent as it still is for transgender and non-binary people everywhere, all the time now, the path of nonviolence toward ourselves is what we still need in order to enjoy the inevitable moment, not very far in the future, I am convinced, when we do win. The practice of nonviolence is activism that heals dysphoria in all of its forms. We must practice it with our inside voices, in the comment section, in our own communities, and yes, even with our dealings with cis people who harm us. That we will win, even against what is going on now, is inevitable. How we win determines nothing less than our future peace. The way that dysphoria can reverse our personal understanding of our own bodies is being played out writ large by the current government as they overturn policies based on careful studies conducted by the previous administration. Just as we say, I hate you to the mirror, they're saying it to our faces. Just as we self-harm, they are harming us. Just as we hold ourselves to the most impossible delusional standards, they're imposing impossible delusional standards on us. 2018, Department of Education announces they will refuse to respond to civil rights complaints filed by transgender students. Bureau of Prisons reverses biological sex in determining transgender prisoner housing. New York Times reveals that the White House is attempting to redefine sex across the federal government to justify refusals to protect transgender people under federal civil rights law. And in 2018, I got to make a movie that was about how institutional gender blocks us from the music of ourselves, and also partly about being trans in a time before there were words for the experience in the 1920s.
Robert, you have a cigarette?
Does that bother you? People come from all over just to see her.
Him.
Think of it like this. We're all born naked, and the rest is just a disguise. Pose hit the same year, fully doubling the number of trans women represented in media, and we got to see a trans woman on the Oscar stage for a story centering the life and experience of a trans woman. Of the 329 regular and recurring LGBTQ characters on broadcast, cable, and streaming programs, 17 were transgender in 2018, 9 transgender women, 4 transgender men, and 4 non-binary characters. Now in 2019, out of all the heinous acts that use tax dollars to discriminate against a tiny fraction of the population, the government said it was okay for medical practitioners to let us die in order to fulfill their religious obligations. Suicide is the ultimate act of dysphoria, but so is murder, if you believe, as I do, that all humans are fundamentally good somewhere inside. 2019, HHS announces regulation allowing medical providers to cite personal beliefs in refusing to provide life-saving care for LGBTQ patients. Administration announces it will oppose the Equality Act, bipartisan legislation providing comprehensive non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people in employment, housing, public spaces, education, jury services, credit, and federal funding. HHS announces proposed regulation to strip out protections for transgender patients in the Affordable Care Act. DOJ submits brief arguing that transgender people are not protected by Title VII's prohibition on sex discrimination to the United States Supreme Court. And in 2019, of the 433 regular and recurring LGBTQ characters on scripted broadcast, cable, and streaming programs, 26 are transgender, an increase of 9 characters from the previous year. 17 are trans women, 5 trans men, and 4 non-binary characters. It's like amid the tragedy of our country's collective dysphoria, we just keep shining. But also, in 2019, I was asked back to my 20th high school reunion by my chosen sister. She begged me to come and sing at an alumni concert. By now, you know I'm always down for a really good story, right? I imagined the screenplay. Badass trans man goes home to backwater and makes a huge splash, right? Turns out everybody was actually pretty cool. Charlotte has a gender center now, and they fought really hard against HB2, that bathroom bill. Things really have changed in 20 years. So I got to just be another alumni, one man's voice in a group of people singing joyfully together. And when we walked into that theater to sing that concert 20 years later, absolutely nothing had changed about the space. Tears just burst out of my face, feeling the person I have become inside that space that has never changed. And then we started singing Les Miserables, which is such a perfect high school musical for so many reasons, right? Suddenly, the trajectory from the trauma of Angels in America to everything I have done with my life until this point came crystal clear. I had been too busy battling my dysphoria and all of the dysphoria all around me to notice that I was only living out my woundedness in the world. I used it as fuel, I spun it to gold for sure, but still, I have been living a life centered around dysphoria on both sides of the battle. How can I ever win? Who would I be, I had to ask myself, without my dysphoria? In that moment, I could feel another version of me calling me into my next big transition. There is a life about to start when tomorrow comes.
When tomorrow I accept and love every part of myself and see myself well and whole. When I accept and love every version of gender that exists in myself and in the people around me without seeing them as some threat to my existence. When I grab hold of my freedom to be in this body and in this life as an actuality and not some permission I have to ask in the form of legislation or rights. Of your heart echoes the beating of the drums. I had to see without question that I have started to become that person. I am that guy I knew I was before I had words to wish myself into being. I am powerful and I use my power to help others feel powerful. If that's not the opposite of dysphoria in all of its forms, I don't know what is. I don't know when I will arrive at a life free of dysphoria, but I do know that it is possible. So I was finishing up this presentation at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I got one of these sort of wild ideas that doesn't end this all so neatly in a bow, even though this fabulous gay way of ending it with a musical is pretty great, right? Right? So I have a story that happened in 2019 that isn't related to representation exactly, but it is related to dysphoria on a really deep level. And I think we have time to tell it. Would you like to hear it? Yes. Okay. I created this epic story called Becoming a Man in 127 Easy Steps because I needed the space of 127 stories to get anywhere close to what being a man, as far as I define that, really means. Being a man is personal, social, and cultural. Being a man is emotional no matter what they tell you. Some men treat being a man like a religion. I'm not so sure on that, but it is definitely spiritual. I didn't mean to go to naked gay men's yoga. Truly. I landed in New York after an 8-hour flight. I looked up the closest yoga studio to my hotel in Chelsea, and I was told that Yoga for the People had a 7:30 class that night. No nudity mentioned. I got there and I found that the class I wanted to attend had been canceled. And yet there was this crowd of men holding yoga mats directly across the street. I asked the friendliest looking one if they were there for Yoga for the People, and he replied, "No, this is naked gay men's yoga." Like, that's a sentence you say every day. I really did not mean to go to naked gay men's yoga. First of all, I'm not gay, though several concerned citizens have asked my wife whether I have explored the possibility yet. I have, and I'm not, but I will take the compliment. And gay men, as much as straight men, are not always cool with trans men. In fact, sometimes it's worse, depending on how often that man was told that he really just wants to be a woman. I crossed the street and hoped that my Yoga for the People class would magically manifest. The gay men filtered into their building, and the teacher, a gorgeous black man whose dreads and musculature made him look like a lion, held the door open. "You sure you're not here for this?" he called over. My mind replied with the mantra that has gotten me everywhere I ever wanted to be in life: fuck it. I crossed and I spoke to the teacher. "I'm not sure this class is for me." They never are. But trust me, plenty of scared boys like you have shown up pretending that they're going to Yoga for the People. It's fine once you jump in, I promise. Okay, but see, I'm trans. You're what? I'm transgender. I'm a transgender man. Is it okay if I come in? Now, it took a minute for the teacher to understand what I meant. Transgender men still don't really exist in the imagination of our culture yet. People think about transgender women, but not men, and certainly not non-binary folks. You wouldn't know what to look at me, so here I am, hidden in plain sight, just a man. Hell yes, you can come in. He swore it like an oath. We are inclusive in this space, and if someone's got a problem, they can talk to me about it. Then he closed the door like he was hugging me in. The studio was dark, lit by candles. 15 men were arranged, facing each other across an aisle, because that's not awkward. But you could hardly see anything, I figured. I dropped my drawers in a corner, grabbed my rented mat and towel, and kept my nether regions covered until my crossed legs covered anything anyone else might be looking at. They weren't. These guys were clearly so used to doing yoga together naked, they just registered their gaze inward. I'm a yoga people, all right. I hear you. You feel represented? Doesn't it feel good? The class started a typical strong asana session with one glaring difference, but only to me. I kept my eyes on the end of my nose as we moved through the positions. At one point, the teacher moved behind me and guided my hips to tilt ever so slightly more up. And I realized that I had never done downward facing dog correctly in 10 years of practice. You have to align the anus parallel to the ceiling, he whispered and walked away. Now you know. Yoga literally saved my life. 10 years into transition, I still wasn't feeling comfortable in my body. I was so depressed about that and the state of just being a trans person in the transphobic world generally that finally a good friend of mine suggested I tried it. I rolled my eyes. I said, "I'm not trying to join some cult of pretzel people, Allison." To which she replied, "You're not, and anyway, what do you have to lose?" She had a point. In Hinduism, one manifestation of God is known as Ardhanarishwara, and I was greeted in my very first yoga class by a statue of this being who embodies both masculine and feminine qualities, like God, erasing the shame of my conservative religious Southern upbringing as I let that sink in, that there is a religion that acknowledges my lived experience, glorifies it, turns it into a brass statue even. Yoga showed me the path through my physical body into a truth that is so much bigger than myself. And now, 10 years into my yoga practice, I was having yet another eye-opening experience. At some point, I began looking around the room of naked men. I have a strong yoga practice, and in 45 minutes, I hadn't broken a sweat. There were men in their 60s struggling, but even men in their 30s sweating pools all over their mats. Men of color, white men, men with tight muscles, men whose bodies sagged. I didn't look at anybody's genitals, but I didn't avoid them either. The room was dark, and the shapes between our legs would all be different based on anything from height to religion and other accidents of birth and being. I wasn't fixated on theirs or mine. I just kept up with the teacher, murmuring directions for what foot or hand to put where. "We're gonna move in to partner yoga now," the teacher whispered to me. "Do you want to partner with the guy next to you, or do you want to work with me?" Obviously, I wanted to work with the person who was the least stranger to me in the room. "Okay, but we'll have to be in the middle of the room demonstrating for everybody." "I'll make sure you look good, don't worry." The center of the room felt much brighter than my row off to the side, and now everybody was definitely looking at my naked body. When I teach people about transgender sensitivity, I always remind them to stay in the present with the person. Don't imagine what their past might have been as a differently gendered person. It's gone now, and it takes you out of the conversation that you're having. If they're actively in transition, you can't stay in the past or jump forward to where they might be headed, so you just have to be here now with them. That's just what I did with my naked teacher and all of those naked men staring at my naked body. In partner yoga, you hold the other person so that they can get a really deep back bend. You help them stretch just far enough into feeling really good. You generally don't do it naked, but regardless, it isn't sexual. It's a deep and careful caring to help them achieve their best pose, or at least to not drop them. From my vantage point in the room, I saw all of these men fully focused on their partners. The older men, certainly survivors of the plague of AIDS, getting a deep and non-sexual intimacy, coming here every week for 20 years. The men who were not at all flexible, the way their partners watched them for any squint or grimace so as not to cause them pain. The young guys who would jaunt off into New York once they put on their clothes like they didn't have a care in the world. They cared for each other with a focused groundedness that they might not have had anywhere else in life. Take this from someone who has seen the contrast. There is a quality of energy to a group of men who are focused on something productive. There is an energetic quality of a man who cares. You can't pretend it doesn't exist, although we've created a culture in which men everywhere suppress and deny it. In that room, I felt it deeper than anywhere ever, and I was a part of it. When we finished, our teacher crowded us into a rugby scrum together, a candle in the center of us, of our circle on the floor. We're gonna take turns now. Every one of you has to look everybody else in the eye, the teacher instructed. In this moment, my whole body very visible, I stared into the other 16 sets of eyes, those soul windows. I saw that some people were so confused, presumably by the shape of my genitals in the diverse mix of shapes in that circle, that they simply couldn't find my eyes at all inside all of their mental turmoil about it. I saw the look of people who truly hadn't noticed. In a few, I met a gaze that told me very clearly I did not belong there. And I was empowered by how ashamed those people look when they had to look me in the eye to tell me that naked truth. And in some eyes, I saw a warmth and welcoming that I have become used to in most places I go now. That is to say, I saw it all exactly as it is. I was both completely in my body and completely in my soul. I felt part of the one soul we share, which yoga makes us conscious of. Being trans can feel like such an enormous difference, as vast as existence. And yet it felt so small in that moment when I felt, oh God, I'm gonna say it, and I am even gonna mean it, where I felt so one with the universe. There's a mantra in yoga that says it better, and the gift of naked gay men's yoga was my deep realization of it. Om Tat Sat. I am that I am. That is exactly what being a man has always meant for me, inside my journey of it, and inside this accidental moment in a yoga studio in Chelsea, almost 20 years after I began my transition. I found my gender identity deeply, not uncomplicatedly confirmed by a group of other men for the first time. And nobody said a word. That's me. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, my dear, dear friend. Everyone is welcome at this point to turn on your cameras as you are able and your microphones as you are able. Yay, all of the love. I put it in the chat, but I just wanted to say it out loud before we engage in the open conversation, that this is streaming on our live YouTube and other social medias, but in the brave space that we strive to create, if you want to ask a question or state a comment unanimously, you can message me directly and I'll make sure it gets to Scott, or shoot us an email and we'll make sure this conversation continues.
Also, just as a note, anything that is in the chat is not being live streamed, so that is completely anonymous and private.
Absolutely. So,
Voice
thanks
of God.
so much. Voice of God. Well, we're in the same, yeah. There you go. So yeah, I just want to open up this space. Scott, if you want to take it away with a post intro to a conversation, that would be wonderful.
I feel like I've said enough. So please, if there's, if you have thoughts you want to share or questions, just want to process what we just all talked about, let's do it.
Oh my gosh, this is so awkward. Can I start?
Please.
Yeah. And also, if you have something, you can just stick the word stack in there in the chat.
Okay.
And
Okay,
then
we'll
call
get to
on you
you.
as the next person to talk.
Great.
Just the word STACK, and you'll go next. Otherwise, you can put your question directly into the chat. And we have our friends at Georgia Center for the Book and Decatur Library helping us keep track of that as well.
Go ahead, Brianna.
Oh my gosh, thanks. So I go by Bree, pronouns she, her. This was amazing. Everyone's probably going to say that, but thank you so much. I really love the part, well, I loved everything, but I really love the parts later in the interview story, in the story about the Affordable Care Act and a lot of the issues we still face in healthcare as transgender individuals trying to get the care that we need. And I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts? Despite the change in our political administration recently, there are still so many problems we face. What is it going to take, or how can we collectively keep pushing the federal government to do the right thing? I feel like we're still so far away from there, but what do you think we can do to, speed it up?
Well, so take a look at what happened with marriage equality. When marriage equality passed, not only was there the Supreme Court case that happened with it, but there was also this moment where they took a poll and 70% of Americans were in favor of marriage equality. 70%. So that's not just gay people who wanted it. That was everybody who cares about gay people and saw what a travesty that it was, that people couldn't love who they wanted to love and have that be supported by the government, right? So we need that 70%. Right? We need all of those people. And that's why I continue to be an advocate, right? We need to get people who will be present, who will be counted, right? And who will vote, who will call their elected officials, who will say, I will educate you. Because you know what, the thing is, as a trans person, right? I have an agenda. Right? People are less likely to listen to me because they think that I'm some pawn in a political game with an agenda. But when my mother calls her senator, when my mother's friends, who are some of whom are on this line, call their senators, their elected representatives and say, no, you're going to listen to me. I know people who are like this. What you are doing is wrong. And here is why. Right. So as I said at the beginning of this conversation, what's sad about marriage equality is that a lot of gays and lesbians pissed off, right? They decided to go, they were done with their activism and they were going to go have their $100,000 weddings, right? And they've left us. The LGBT movement is not the same for transgender people, right? As it has been for lesbians and gays, right? And I'm not even talking about bisexual people because that's a whole other piece of the puzzle, right? So we need them back, and we need all people who are cisgender to fight for us, fight with us, fight on our behalfs. And it takes listening to our stories and listening to what we're telling you we need and then doing it. So that's what I think. And I actually have a lot of hope about that. I actually, as I said, I see so many more people actually really care about this. So I actually have a lot of hope. Good question. Who's next?
Yeah, the next person is Ray.
Go ahead, Ray.
Hi, my name's Ray. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns. I'm 20 years old, and I only figured out I was trans like 2 years ago, so I'm like a baby gay. I'm just like a little, and I'm still in the closet, so I'm gonna be real quiet.
You're like literally coming from the closet.
Yeah. No, I'm on. But I just wanted to say that your story was really amazing to hear, because I don't hear a lot of like older trans stories. You know, I've been seeing a lot of representation in the media, but a lot of them are around my age and stuff like that. But I haven't seen a lot of older representation. It was just really good to hear a story from someone who has lived, you're still living that life and stuff, but to hear about all the things you experience, all the things I might experience. It's really wonderful to hear that. And like, yeah, and it's weird because you talked about a moment where you related to like the Angels in America situation. And I remember having a situation like that in high school where I was like, I relate, like when the trans military band happened. And at that point, I didn't know I was trans, but something within me was like really personally like offended, and I like wanted to cry. And I didn't understand why until like 2 years later. But it's so weird that like I can remember events like that. And it's so weird living in a time where it feels like people are against me, but also I see how we are still here, how we're still being represented in the media, and how we're still fighting. So just that.
That's
yeah.
amazing. And so many more people are for you than you ever imagined, right? But I think
know, yeah.
That's so interesting because you did know, right? When you said there was this part of me that was so offended, I didn't know I was trans, and you did know. And that's something that I always want to talk about. That's part of the dysphoria that our culture puts on us, right? You knew you were trans. I guarantee you've known you were trans, right? But not having the language, not having the ability to connect and speak your truth, right, is a reflection of how your culture is pushing against you and telling you that you don't know who you are when you absolutely do. And I think that you just said it so perfectly and proved it, right?
Well, there we go.
I'm so glad that this is helpful for you, though.
So I believe the next one is Linda actually put their information in the chat, and I'm just going to read it unless Linda, you'd like to.
Oh, I see. Here we go.
Okay, so I'll read it. I am an advanced practice registered nurse. I manage a medical unit inside a youth detention center and also a clinic in a youth shelter. I have been working very hard to make as many changes as I can so that the LGBTQ plus youth feel welcome, cared for, and cared about in our clinics. What do you think is the most important thing I should be thinking about doing when providing health care to the trans youth? Oh, I have the same question.
I mean, this is so hard. And first, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical practitioner. I'm just someone who has experienced those people learning on me. You know, I think the thing to foreground is our agency, right? And our self-knowledge. One of the things that keeps happening around questions of transgender youth is people saying, well, how can you really know? You know, if you got, you'd get your face tattooed when you're 15 years old, and you can't possibly know, how that's going to affect you. So I'm going to say, yes, I think that there's a piece of every human being's biological development where our brain hasn't stopped forming yet, right? And so, there is a period, it's like why you can't rent a car before you're 26, because your brain actually can't process the like long-term, things that are going to happen, right? Consequences of your actions. That's a real biological reality for all humans, okay? And yet, we see what people do before the age of 26 all the time. Right? When it comes to your identity, look, that's what adolescence is about. It's about figuring yourself out. That is what every human adolescent is doing. So putting some kind of artificial block by saying you're not sure that we know what we think we know or what we are exploring, right? Take our exploration seriously. Support our exploration in the same way that you support a young man finding his way to manhood, or a young woman embodying her womanhood, right? Allow us the space and give us the support to figure those things out. Take us at our word. And if our word changes, change with it, because that's what adolescence is about. It's about change, right? Don't do the concern trolling. Concern trolling are things like, well, we just don't know what hormones might do. We're not sure about how blockers. What if something bad happens? I tell you what, the bad thing that's going to happen is your kid committing suicide. That's right. So having our back and affirming who we are, right, is the number one. And we know there's actually a study done that if one transgender youth can speak, if a transgender youth finds one adult in their life who will listen to them non-judgmentally and who will support their gender and affirm their gender, they are 50% less likely to attempt suicide. So all you have to do is believe them, right? That's the number one thing. And I understand that it's hard and complicated when you're in, especially when you're in a juvenile center. I worked in a juvenile detention center for a few years. That's a whole ball of wax. Also with medical things. So really working, I recommend finding WPATH, WPATH, look them up. Look up, just look around and look. There are lots of medical practitioners who are trans affirmative and who give guidance around, how to do this. So you have to just do that research and find out what other people are doing. But there are some amazing medical practitioners who are doing amazing work out there. And if anyone who's on this call happens to have resources, please go ahead and put it in the chat. Because, this is the way that we have these conversations. This is the way that we do that work.
Yeah, Linda, I just want to back that up is that, Scott and I have been working together with our youth for the 20 years that we've also been creating productions and coming out stories, etc. And we at 7 Stages have a youth program that has been very much a part of the fight for a long time. I like to say that Scott's on my speed dial. But we have a lot of resources here at 7 Stages as well. And I'm not sure where you're located, but certainly speaking for many of the youth and alumni that have gone through our programmings, we are a support system that may not be medical based, but using the art to be able to express and find yourself has been a healing resource, as you heard in Scott's speech just now. So,
Linda, also one thing I really want to point out is that a lot of youth are criminalized because they are not only, first we take race, right? Like that's a whole piece of it. And when we also include gender nonconformity, it makes youth a target for being criminalized and for getting put through the system. Essentially, right, as you know, right? So I just want to say that for other people.
No, and they're very overrepresented in the legal system. And so without getting into all the crap about social justice, because it's much more time than we have, I think clearly, and I've educated myself for quite a long time now, but I think specifically, I wanted to know, you as a youth, what do you wish someone would have said to you, or what do you wish a medical practitioner would have provided you? I think that's what I kind of like to know from your perspective.
Absolutely.
On my side, I kind of know, but.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, and thank you. I'm so glad.
And I appreciate that the youth do not have to educate me on trans issues. I can help them. So that's not quite it. So I was just really wondering, as the youth in that room with me, what do you wish, gosh, if they would only ask this or do this? Beyond using your pronouns and your name and all those good things.
Well, those things aren't little. Right?
No, they're good.
Right? That's
they're
it. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that huge piece. And as you're educating yourself, right, we know that adolescents too sometimes need that hand, right? So sometimes if you even just pronounce the words non-binary or transgender, right, like and give them just a little bit of like, oh, this person might actually know what they're talking about, right? That's the affirmation that I'm talking about. And then especially if you follow it up with affirmation, right? Non-judgmental, non-questioning affirmation, right? So I think I'm feeling it out that you've got this pretty well handled. Do you know?
I try really hard. I have to say that. I have, my transgender flag and my rainbow flag. I have all of we have our rainbow tags on our tags. We have big posters about pronouns and why they're important. And we have cue cards for kids who want to approach healthcare providers and they don't have a way to talk. We have all that, but I was just making sure that maybe there isn't something that we're missing or something that we're not providing that could be helpful to these kids.
You just can't underestimate how it feels when an adult person in power affirms your identity and tells you, I believe you. I believe you know who you are. I support you. let's make sure you get care. Like that is, it seems basic to people who understand, right? But for people, for youth who are coming from situations of extreme anti-trans violence, which can just be being out, can just be reading the newspaper sometimes, can be, is always being on social media, right? Having a real adult say that to them and give and show them how this works and helping them through whatever process they want to explore for themselves and doing that lovingly. I think if you're doing that, you're doing it right as far as I'm concerned.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, we do let them choose what module they feel comfortable to be on. We let them choose the gender of the person who's helping them. We let them have appropriate clothing, you know, everything that we can do to try to support them and who they are. We do try to do it, but I still wish we could do more. I still wish we could somehow, I don't know, just embrace them more fully so that they really feel that compassion and care when they're there.
I think that's a whole.
That's all I think.
That's all I think. Don't worry.
It would be amazing to be able to connect offline and continue that because it's an ongoing conversation that we have. If you can shoot me your contact information or
his work with youth is unbelievable and unparalleled.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Linda.
I just want to do a time check. This is the conversation is essential for us.
Please, I'll stay as long as folks want to. So, you know.
Me too. So we're here. We just kind of gave the time frame. The next on the docket was Brenda Bynum.
Brenda Bynum is a longtime teacher of mine. So important in my development as an artist.
Brenda, did we lose you?
Might have lost her, alas.
Okay, well, I'll move back, but if Brenda, you're still there, hit me up and I'd love to circle back with you because, oh, I love you. Next then we have Kelly.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm currently in the midst of my MSW and doing clinical social work with multiple trans clients. And your perspective on dysphoria is totally messing me up in all of the best ways because I have felt like a lot of my supervisors have pushed me into this conversation that you started about bipolar and borderline and these diagnoses. And I felt uncomfortable with these things the whole time and I couldn't figure out why. And you've like finally put some words and stories to that. And so as someone who's going into the clinical field, who wants to shift that narrative, who's trying to start conversations even about religious trauma and how it relates to sexuality and gender, I'm curious about, you know, if you could rewind time and miracles could happen, what is the diagnosis or the conversation or the framework you would have felt would have been helpful at that time versus the harmful framework that you received?
Well, you know, like I said, I actually feel like my therapist was doing the best job. I had a great therapist, you know what I mean? We worked together for 7 years, right? So I really didn't have any issues except that. And I thought it was so perfect when they had that awareness and shared it with me. They were transparent. You know, they were like, I was thinking about you in the absolute wrong way because of gender. And we could have really worked on this, right? Now, look, all things happen for a reason, et cetera, right? Like miracles can't happen. We can't turn back time. I just think we need to be having these conversations, care providers, especially in the same way that, you know, now it is unacceptable to have a conversation without thinking about the intersection of race, right? Like we must think about gender, and that's holistic. It's not just about transgender and non-binary people. We have to think about gender like for everybody, and how is gender, you know, framing how we think about things, and can we have space to ask those questions and to think those things through, because often there will be a reason for that, right? We will find, not in every case, but we will find a reason to think about it. So it's just more about really insisting, no, we're gonna look at this, right? We're gonna ask these questions. I think that's what would change things going forward. And thank you for doing that work. Being an MSW is no easy job. So thank you for taking that on. You're one of the good ones.
So next up is there's a bunch of resources in the chats also, and we can figure out how to post some of the resources on our website as we move forward throughout the coming days and months and years. But there's always the sense to make sure that we offer the resources that you need. Next up, we have Leo, and I know Leo and Sid, are you together? These are two YC alum folk.
Hi, y'all.
Hi, Leo and Sid. I love you.
Love you too, Gotcha.
Hi.
You're together. Oh, that's so fun. Okay.
Yeah, we were both gonna watch it tonight, and I was like, well, we've been quarantining together anyway. We might as well.
Thanks, you two.
YC creates, and Scott was a old-time originator of our Youth Creates team, now in our 18th year, and so.
Which is weird because I'm 27.
Yeah, me too.
We were talking about before the event how, hearing Scott at Youth Creates, while like everyone has their own coming out journey at different points in their life, it was, a time where I got to hear an adult person talk about these things in a way that was very real, and it wasn't online. It wasn't coming from a cis person. I was able to think about things through that lens through the next few years. And
Yeah, because when I met you for the first time, I had just moved here from Alabama. I just got kicked out for being trans, and going into YC, it was just really interesting getting to hear like an adult trans person at the time, and it's like weird like being an adult now like talking about this, but it gave me a lot of hope for being trans as an adult and navigating the world, and just helping me figure out and be more comfortable with who I am.
A lot of people have asked in here what something that you can do to help. I think if you're if you're a cis adult, even if you're cis and gay or what have you, if you have resources like, you're here, you have the access to Scott, there are trans mental health providers nowadays. And if you have the capacity to, I think one of the best things you can do is, even if it's just through a screen or even if it's just through literature or having someone come sit in and talk, like finding a queer mental health provider is like a huge, just does something totally different, because you're allowed an access to your community that you may not have had unless it's with other children. And I guess I wanted to ask Scott specifically about your opinion on creating stories moving forward that focus on trans joy. I watched Disclosure yesterday, and while I was able to learn a lot about transphobia in the film industry, I didn't learn anything about trans joy in the film industry. I even was like, oh, I saw Scott on screen for a moment, but there are all these actors who are in trans roles, and I saw all this film footage over and over and over again where I see these adult, passable, wealthy trans actors talking about their most vulnerable moments in their life. And then we cut to a full non-trigger warning scene of like multiple acts of violent transphobia. And I expected at some point to be like, who are these actors? What are their roles have been? Like, do we get to see them act? And I guess, I want to talk about my own coming out stories, and I want to talk about others, but I also want to talk about life after and like living.
Yeah. Well, that's so much what Becoming a Man in 127 Easy Steps really is, right? It's 127 different stories where only a portion of them focus on transition, right?
Yeah.
And because it's a whole life story, there are going to be stories that are difficult. There are going to be, traumatic stories that, like, there is a lot of trauma, unfortunately, in trans life, right? Because of
that's the difference between like trans made media for trans people, where like you can, like, there's a sense of humor, like there's a sense of lightness, there's a sense of relatability, whereas like, I want to also create media and like focus on media that has that realness aspect to it of like someone's life, as opposed to like just what feels like trauma porn.
Right. Well, and I think what you're really focusing on, so everything is through the frame of the culture that is allowing it to exist. And so that means cis people with power are determining what stories you get to see, right? And, I always would talk about transparent, right? I would talk about transparent because groundbreaking show, politics all around it, et cetera. But at the same time, what was so interesting to me about transparent was it was supposed to be the story of a person who is transitioning later on in life. What it really was the story of her family dealing with her transition. And what I realized was that's where culture is, or was at the time, right? Culture was, there are we recognize now that trans people do exist and that transition is a real thing. But the story we want to tell is how we're all dealing with it, right? That's the story that we want, that cis culture wants reflected back at them. They want to see themselves on screen, right? And so now where it's moved to is, okay, we've acknowledged that trans people exist, that transition is a real thing. We're still sort of dealing with how we deal with it, but the step before we can allow those stories, I believe it is a step, and I believe it is the step before they allow us to actually tell our stories in all of their complexity and all of their joy, right? Which is, we have to feel really sorry for you so that we can feel sorry enough to give you rights. So we have to tell all these trauma stories, right, in order to get people to recognize you as human, in order for us to give you rights. And we see this if we look at gay and lesbian representation as well. Like we like to say that trans representation is like 20 years behind gay and lesbian representation. So we're kind of Ellen just post coming out now, which, if you remember, was a horribly traumatic time for Ellen, right? And we had to go through many years of people feeling sorry and bad about gay people before we started recognizing that they deserve rights. So it's annoying. But again, I think trans people just have to take the means of production into our own hands and tell our stories, which is what I've been doing. I couldn't get into Hollywood, so I made my own work, right? Now I'm in Hollywood and I'm continuing to make my own work. And whether or not I'm going to do it independently, whether or not someone, whether or not a Netflix wants to put it out there or whatever, if they're not ready for my story, I know you are, so I'm going to get it to you as fast as possible. So just tell your stories, just like tell all the joy, tell all the difference, just do all the things, right? The number one thing that I regret, it's not really my regret to have, but the number one thing that I'm sad about as a trans person is that I spent 20 years educating people about trans stuff and not focusing 100% on my craft as an artist. I feel a real loss there. So let me have made that mistake for you. Focus on your craft, tell your stories,
Thank you. Yeah, and I think moving past disclosure, I think it would be really interesting to see a documentary about trans people in the crew of media, because I just started working in the film industry as a crew member, and not a lot of people ask about pronouns. Like, not a lot of people, will even, like, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And like, I've been mass presenting for a very long time, so like it was kind of like very shocking moving from the theater world into the film world, where it's not as talked about. Because like I feel like in theater it's a more commonly discussed issue as opposed to the film industry, which, I mean, the people that I have had to come out to, like, albeit awkward, they're just like, oh, okay, that's fine, we'll use the right pronouns and stuff like that. It's just the constant coming out again in the film industry, like, where I have to engage the issue as opposed to them asking pronouns. So I think it's really interesting to have something like disclosure, but for film crew people.
Yeah.
Because you essentially become double invisible, not only as like the kind of work that is pushed under the rug as like, you know, physical labor, it's also like emotional labor to talk about your identity. Because like you're more like,
It's not work. It's not the work that you're there to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like I'd be running around trying to get, you know, people like, you know, their meals and stuff like that, or, you know, just doing hard physical labor, and then just immediately just like wrong pronouns. And I'm just like, well, we're all super busy, so I can't really come out to you right now because you have a million things on your list and I have a million things on my list that I need to do. So by the end of the day, we're all tired and I have no time to talk about it. So it's just like, it'd be great, you know, if that conversation especially could happen in crew, because like, I feel like actors have a better chance of like having that conversation than actual crew members. Like, yeah.
I
So
totally
it'll
agree.
be interesting to see like where the conversation goes from here, you know, because like it's good, like, you know, to see like actors who are trans like tell their stories and stuff like that, but it'll be really interesting to like push that conversation in this industry even more.
It's like they want our labor, but they're gonna have to figure the rest out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a.
And like I said, I feel like having like no problems. Like once I like come out with people, like people are very accepting. But it's just like the fact that like I'm having to do all the work of like doing it, and it's a lot of emotional labor on top of the labor that I'm already doing.
Wow, what would the world be if people just were like, oh, there are trans people. I have a reference for that.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, those. It's so interesting to have this perspective across generations, right? And the space that you were given as young people to be self and finding yourselves in a world that doesn't accept that. That's a topic that we should come back around to and continue to figure out resources to help push that agenda. So noted. Let's brainstorm about a new event in which we like make initiatives happen. Again, pointing everybody to the chat, there's a whole bunch of resources there, and we will post that on our website and make that accessible to everybody. Adrian, are you still with us?
I am.
I think Kasha said.
Hey.
Hi, I'm Adrian. I use he, him pronouns. Mine is less of a question and more of a thank you and a realization. You said a bit about how, of course, you liked to play different characters, and that's why you were in theater, you know. And I never really realized that my love of narratives, you know, it's always been narratives. It's I didn't realize it was like an escapism type thing from a world that's difficult.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah, I just never made that connection. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Adrian.
Oh, I didn't get back to it. Allie, step in if I'm missing anybody, but doctors Jason Schneider and Sonia.
I think people were referring to them as resources.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
They're great resources in Atlanta, unless they're on the phone.
Resource. I didn't know if they were trying to stack them. My dad, Scotty Captain Howard, asked how we can share this with other friends. I'm going to take that offline because this is a conversation, but it is streamed on our social medias. And so, Dad, I'll give you more information about that. I don't mean to skip you. I love you. And Scott does too. Barry.
I love you too.
Thank you, Heidi. Hi, everyone. I'm Barry, he, him, his, and Scott. You know, I've known you for 20 years. What I have to offer is an appreciation, not so much a question, but I just so appreciate the quality of your storytelling and your comment about your artistry notwithstanding. The level of nuance you bring to the stories you present, the situations you find or inject yourself into that are in so many ways kind of non-binary. I think about the story of the judge that I'd never heard before, and there's such humanity there. And the yoga story, which was just a delicious dessert to the entire feast. And that there's such nuance in the moments, and then the perspective that you bring to it is an example for all of us, that you just bring an openness of spirit and a being in the moment, that being in the moment that you talk about, that you model for us. And I think, so many of us here are allies, or we're, deep in the struggle ourselves. And, but, I know I'll speak for myself that, I can forget that humanity and that presentness. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Well, and Barry's an amazing storyteller who mentored me. So thank you for helping me become in all the ways that you have. And it means a lot. That really means a lot coming from you. So thank you.
For sure, Barry, you have definitely carried the torch for many of us in Atlanta and beyond. Chels Trombley.
Yeah, I'm right here. Sorry. Hi, I'm Chels. They, them, theirs pronouns. I am also an MSW student. I want to take a quick second to say thank you to Kelly for posting this in one of our MSW Facebook groups. She's the reason that I am here, just in this physical space, or virtual space. But I was kind of fascinated by the presenting of dysphoria as almost like a structurally and socially imposed set of traumas and traumatic experiences rather than something internal. And I really love that. It's quite affirming to how I aim to work with people and with students in something that I didn't realize I was kind of subconsciously doing. And I'm wondering if you kind of designed your description of dysphoria, or if you've had the chance to chew through your description of dysphoria as almost like a clinical model of sorts that can be utilized in that way to understand ourselves as trans clinicians and transgender clients that we are working with.
Well, I'm just somebody who's had a lot of therapy. So I'm not a clinician, but if the way that I put it together, but I'm halfway joking. The thing is, I got into mental health and mental wellness because of the dysphoria that I was experiencing. That wasn't as a trans person, I didn't just come with dysphoria. It's not a genetic marker on, along with wherever the little genetic thing of being trans, which I do think we're born this way. Right. So what I'm trying to say is I've done so much therapy now. My therapist hasn't been alive for as long as I've been doing therapy. Do you see what I'm saying? And great therapist, but that's what I'm saying. I've done a lot of therapy. And so I also can kind of see how it works. And that's how I was able to talk about it. But at the same time, not a therapist. I don't know. I don't go through the things that you go through. So please take what I've done here, right? And use it and build on it. And, if it's helped you see that, I think that's the role of the artist, right? Is to help you see something and recontextualize and reframe it. So please go ahead and run with it if it's helpful. But it seems totally clear to me that dysphoria, and that's why the title is Dysphoria, or Hormones Don't Harm Trans People, People Do, right? So, right, let's start thinking about it that way, Thank you and good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone, for your courage. Joe and Allie, I know you were also looking at the chats. There's so much good feedback and responses there. I tried to stick directly to the questions. We are absolutely past the time that Joe would have kicked us out of the library by now. But I know that our duty as artists and social justice bearers are to continue this conversation. So it certainly isn't ending with this presentation. It is not only a part of this season's, hell seasons are these days. But our mission at Seven Stages is to connect and through those vital conversations and really be bold and fierce with our artistic responses and our conversations. And so I want to make sure that no questions or voices get unheard. And so we, in our social media and our website, and I'm sure Joe with the Decatur for the book will do so as well, to make sure that the platform exists to continue. Again, if you are in Atlanta and are able to stop by and feel safe to do so, we can hand books through gloves and windows of cars, and even mail you, if you are out of town, these books. Stephanie Burt is phenomenal. This book is really using imagination to tell her coming out story. She uses the a hermit crab as far as trying to find her right shell and growing up in a boy's body. It's really beautiful. We're working with like middle school and high schoolers on this, as well as professional artists, to curate a big finale in June. And you too could grab this book or any of the other 4 books and do an artistic response or conversation piece, including, yes, our very own Scott Turner Schofield's To Truth and Lie. You can like get this for complimentary on behalf of us at Seven Stages. And yeah, thanks to the National Endowment for the Arts, Teresa Davis's Drowned Mermaids Manifesto, Robert Earl Price's Blood Flow, so much good material to create from, to have conversations from. We make art, we connect our lives to the artistic process because it offers truth, as you just found that Scott has done so well in his own career. I can't thank you enough, with my core and my need to be able to listen to our humanity, to divide those divisions. Thank you enough, Scott, for your generosity and courage. I know that this was a lot and we went through ups and downs on how to create it. But I really appreciate everybody's participation. Please hit me up, Heidi at sevenstages.org. Destiny can be found at education at sevenstages.org. We can connect you to Scott. Joe, pipe in if you want to offer.
Hey, get your library card. Pay your fines. That's like, I used to joke that paid for the toilet paper budget, but it's now paying for the mask and the PPE budget. Pay your fines.
Yeah, our libraries, our literature, our art making is being questioned as far as what is essential, let alone to the long, long history of our trans and non-binary and gender-breaking conformidor humans that we are. We're human, beloved community.
Can I just make a shout out to something? I just want to make a shout out to PFLAG.
Yes.
For people that need support, PFLAG is a national organization, but there are lots of resources on pflagatl.org for people that live in the Atlanta metro area.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give a shout out.
PFLAG has been such an amazing presence in my life. My mom is a strong member of PFLAG. She mentors other parents, and without PFLAG, I don't know who it would be. So honestly, I totally shout that out as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Donate as you are able to any of these organizations. Lost and Found, there are many, and we list them on our website too. So resources and sharing of these entities are what make our voice stronger. Big, big love to everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you for being here.
Scott Turner Schofield. Big old shouts, everybody, drum roll, yay! Have a